worth 100,000 pesos. Understand this topic? Class, our topic for today is notes payable. To understand this topic, let's have an illustration. For example, we are ABC and bibili tayo ng goods or inventory from XYZ worth 100,000 pesos. Makaka-receive tayo ng inventory from XYZ worth 100,000 pesos. In exchange, we will issue a promissory note. Ang nakalagay sa promissory note, I promise to pay XYZ 100,000 pesos 6 months from now. Okay? In the books of XYZ, journal entry is debit notes receivable, credit sales, 100,000. In the books of ABC, journal entry is debit inventory, credit notes payable, 100,000. So if you remember class, sa first half of review natin, na-discuss natin yung notes receivable. And in fact, notes payable is just the counterparty or yung opposite side of notes receivable. Okay? If notes receivable is an asset, notes payable is a liability. Right? Now, let's go to the measurement. We will follow PFRS 9. If you remember class, PFRS 9 is about financial instruments. And we have two types of financial instruments, financial assets and financial liabilities. Examples of financial assets are receivables, such as accounts receivable, notes receivable, loans receivable, and investments. Na-discuss natin yan sa first half of our review. Sir, ano naman examples of financial liabilities? Well, ang maganda example niyan is our topic for today, notes payable. Right? As usual, we have initial and subsequent measurement. According to PFRS 9, financial liabilities, such as notes payable, are initially measured at fair value minus transaction cost. Take note, minus yan. If you remember sa notes receivable, ang initial measurement yan, fair value plus transaction cost. Sir, bakit minus? Kasi nasa opposite side tayo, nasa liability side. Okay? Pero kasi actually, for notes payable, usually, zero naman yung transaction cost. So we can say that notes payable is initially measured at fair value. Okay? Sir, how much yung fair value? Well, depende yan, class. Sa term of the promissory note. If the term is short term, or ibig sabihin, within 1 year, yung promissory note, okay, the fair value is just equal to the face value. Alam natin in accounting, kapag short term, within 1 year, hindi tayo nagdi-discount. That's why the fair value is equal to the face value. Now, if the note is long term, let's say more than 1 year, okay, the fair value is equal to the present value. Okay? Now, just to recall, na-discuss natin ito sa notes receivable, pero ulitin ko lang. Sir, how much naman yung present value? Well, depende yan, class. If the promissory note or the notes payable is interest-bearing or non-interest-bearing. Alam natin, class, kapag interest-bearing, the present value is just equal to the face value. Right? If non-interest-bearing, the present value is equal to discounted value or discounted amount. Pag sabi mong discounted value or discounted amount, ibig sabihin, it's less than the face amount. Okay? Na-discuss natin yan before, ni-recall lang natin. Okay? So before we continue our lecture, sagot muna tayo ng illustrative examples para mas ma-appreciate natin yung topic natin about notes payable. Okay, let's go to illustrative example number 1. This is about short-term note. And again, alam natin pag short-term, hindi natin discount yan. The fair value is just equal to the face value. Okay, so we have requirements, basically the journal entries. Okay, yung requirements natin. Now, let's read the given. Pinnacle Company Natural Energy Supplier borrowed 8 million cash on November 1 to fund a geological survey. The loan was granted by ABC Bank under a short-term credit line. Pinnacle issued a 9-month, 12% promissory note with interest payable at maturity. So 9 months yung note, yung interest mabayaran natin after 9 months. The fiscal period is a calendar year. Okay, requirement is prepare the journal entry for the issuance of the notes payable. Okay, so illustrative example number 1. First entry natin, nung nag-issue tayo ng note, January 1, 2025, debit cash, how much yung na-receive natin class? That is 8 million. Debit cash, credit notes payable, 8 million. Actually, pwedeng loans payable since ang counterparty natin dito or yung katransact natin is a bank. Okay, pwedeng notes payable, pwedeng loans payable. As long as nag-issue tayo ng promissory note, pwede natin gamitin is the notes payable. Alright, so that is November 1 pala yan. November 1, 2025. So alam natin, December 31, kailangan mag-accrue tayo ng interest. So that's requirement number 2, prepare the appropriate adjusting entry for the notes payable. December 31, 2025, debit interest expense, credit interest payable, plus computing nga natin. So 8 million, multiply natin by 12%. And then November, December says 2 months times 2 over 12. Na-compute nyo by 160,000. So we have to record accrued interest, 160,000 on December 31. Okay? Let's go to requirement number 3. Prepare the journal entry for the payment of the notes payable. Tama ba class? 9 months yan. So kung November, in-issue, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July. That's July 31. Tama? So July 31, babayaran na natin yung notes payable natin, 2026. So that is debit notes payable. How much? 8 million. Debit interest payable. So huwag mo kalimutan class na may interest payable tayo last December 31, 160,000. And then, meron pa tayong interest from January 1 to July 31. So ilang months yun? 7 months. Compute natin. 8 million times 12% times 7 over 12. Nakuha nyo ba yung 560,000? Yes. So debit interest expense, 560,000. I-total natin lahat ng class. Ang total na babayaran natin at maturity, 8 million plus 160,000 plus 560,000. You get 8,720,000. So, illustrative example 1 is a short-term notes payable. Alam natin class kapag short-term, hindi natin dini-discount. That's why, kung magkano na-receive natin, 8 million, hindi yung notes payable natin, 8 million. Okay? So, these are the journal entries for illustrative example number 1. Let's go to illustrative example number 2. Long-term note naman. Okay? So, tingnan natin. Provide the journal entries from 2025 to 2027. October 1, 2025, Mr. Accounting Company issued a 2 years. So, ingat ka sa mga dates. So, dito nag-issue ka ng October 1. So, kailangan mag-accrue tayo ng interest on December 31. Okay, issue the 2-year, 12%, 1 million note payable in exchange for a piece of land. Okay? Principal is due on October 1, 2027, but interest is due annually. So yung principal, as usual, after 2 years natin babayaran. Kasi 2025 natin issue, 2027 yung maturity. Interest daw, babayaran natin every year. Okay? Now, take note na interest bearing to. Kasi may nakalagay na 12%. No, sabi ko kanina, kapag interest bearing, the fair value is just equal to the face value. Parang short-term notes lang siya. Okay? Now, so let's do the journal entry. October 1, 2025, naka-receive tayo ng land. Debit land, credit notes payable. How much? 1 million. Let's go to December 31, 2025. Mag-compute tayo ng accrued interest. 1 million times 12%. October, November, December, 3 months times 3 over 12, you get 30,000. Debit interest expense, credit interest payable, 30,000. Okay, that's our accrued interest. Now, babayaran natin yung interest na yan kasi sabi annual daw tayo nagbabayad ng interest. So, October 1, 2026, bayaran natin yan. Debit interest payable, 30,000. Pero take note, kailangan mag-compute tayo ng interest from January 1 to October 1. Okay, so ilang months yun? January to September 30 basically, so that's 9 months, tama? So, compute tayo, 1 million times 12% times 9 over 12. Na-compute nyo ba yung 90,000? Yes. Debit interest expense, 90,000. Credit cash, so 30 plus 90, that's 120,000. Okay, so that's our journal entry, October 1, 2026. Let's do December 31, 2026. So, mag-accrue ulit tayo ng interest for 3 months, October, November, December. Na-compute natin yun earlier, that's 30,000. Debit interest expense. Credit interest payable, 30,000. Okay, straightforward lang. So that's our accrued interest, 30,000, December 31, 2026. And maturity date, October 1, 2027. Bayaran na natin yung notes payable natin, 1 million. Debit notes payable, 1 million. Bayaran natin yung accrued interest at 30,000. Debit interest payable, 30,000. And don't forget, magkukumpute tayo ng interest expense from January 1 to September 30. Na-compute natin earlier, that's 90,000. Debit interest expense, 90,000. We credit cash, so complete natin lahat yan, 1 million plus 30,000 plus 90,000, you should get 1,120,000. 1,120,000. These are your journal entries. For illustrative example number 2, kailangan mo lang ma-realize dito, if it's interest-bearing, the fair value is just equal to face value, hindi natin kailangan mag-discount. Alright? So, ayan. Don't forget then, every December 31, we have to record accrued interest. Okay? Let's go to illustrative example number 3. This one, for number 3, erase natin class. This is about non-interest bearing. Okay? So, alam natin pag non-interest bearing, if you recall sa lecture natin, kailangan tayong mag-discount. Alright? So, discounted value. Pag sa'yo mo discounted value, that amount is below the face value. So, tingnan natin class. Illustrative example number 3. Provided journal entries. CPA company, okay, acquired equipment in exchange for 100,000 cash and a 4-year non-interest bearing 1 million note payable due in 4 equal annual installments. So, kung 1 million yung class, tama ba 1 million, i-divide natin by 4, tama, 250,000 per year yung babayaran natin na principal. Okay? Meron ba tayong babayaran na interest? Wala kasi nakalagay, non-interest bearing. Alright? So, principal lang yung babayaran natin. Provided journal entries. So, gagawin ko dyan class, kailangan natin i-present value yan. Okay? Binigyan tayo ng PV factor, which is annuity, ordinary annuity, kasi babayaran natin 250,000 every year, same amount, gagamitin natin doon, ordinary annuity. So, ganito gagawin ko dyan class. Computing ko muna yung present value, which is basically 250,000 per year, multiply ko by ordinary annuity of 3.037. Okay? So, compute with me, 250,000 times 3.037. Na-compute nyo ba yung 759,250? Yes. 759,250. Alright? Now, gagawin ko dyan, journal entry natin, January 1, 2025, debit equipment, tama, yun yung bilhin natin, equipment. So, nag-down payment tayo ng 100,000, okay? And then, meron tayong note payable na may present value of 759,250. So, 759,250 plus 100,000, yung equipment natin is worth 859,250. Debit equipment, 859,250. And then, debit, credit mo tayo. Credit cash, yung down payment natin 100,000. Credit notes payable, face value of 1 million. 1 million, i-minus natin yung 759,250. 1 million minus 759,250, you get 240,750. Ang tawag natin dyan, discount on notes payable. So, debit discount on notes payable, 247.50. Okay? So, ang presentation natin class sa balance sheet, so we have, in the balance sheet, we have notes payable, 1 million, minus discount on notes payable, 247.50. The carrying amount of our notes payable is 759.250. Okay? So, ganyan yung presentation natin in the balance sheet. Alright, now, balik tayo dito class. Subsequently, alam natin initial measurement is fair value for notes payable. Subsequently, notes payable is measured at amortized cost. Alam natin class, pag sinabi mong amortized cost, kailangan natin gumamit ng amortization table. So every year, kailangan mag-amortization table tayo. Sir, bakit dun sa first 2 illustrative examples, hindi tayo nag-amortization table? Because the fair value is equal to the face value. Wala tayong kailangan i-amortize. Kapag discounted value, right, non-interest bearing, kailangan mag-amortization table tayo. Now, ilalagay ko class, isusulat ko yung amortization table. Alam ko, master nyo na yung amortization table. Para maging efficient yung discussion natin, ipapakita ko na lang yung mga amounts. Alright? Because I know, alam niyo kung paano computing to. Pero di-describe ko pa rin kung paano. So, gawa tayo ng amortization table. We have date, interest paid, okay? Actually, principal paid to. Kasi non-interest bearing, so lagay ko na lang paid. Interest expense, amortization, and carrying amount. Again, wala tayong interest paid because non-interest bearing. Principal yung binabayaran natin. January 1, 2025, December 31, 2025, December 31, 2026, December 31, 2027, and last one is December 31, 2028. Alam natin class, yung paid natin is 250,000 per year, so 250K per year. And then, carrying amount natin at the start is 759,250. Okay, alam natin class, yung interest expense is basically 12%, okay? So 12% of the carrying amount, so 759,250 times 12%, you get 91,110. Amortization is just the difference between the two, 158,890. Carrying amount after, or on December 31, 2025, 603,660, okay? So alam na natin kung paano gumawa ng amortization table. Iko-complete ko lang yan and then tignan natin yung journal entries, okay? Let's go to the next year. 72,043. Amortization is 177,957. Carrying amount is 422,403. Third year natin, 50,688. Amortization is 199,312 and carrying amount is 223,091. And last year natin, dapat class, maging 0 na yung carrying amount natin because bayad na lahat ng 250,000. Carrying amount should be 0. And then our amortization should be 223,091. Therefore, interest expense natin is 26,909. So mag-adjust na tayo sa last year para mag-zero yung carrying amount natin. Okay? So again, if it's non-interest bearing, kailangan gumawa tayo ng amortization table. Ang goal ng amortization table is mag-zero na yung carrying amount natin at maturity date. Okay? Now, let's do journal entry on December 31, 2025. Titingin na tayo sa table natin. So magbayad muna tayo ng 20,000. Debit, notes payable, credit cash, 250,000. And then, i-record natin yung interest expense natin, which is debit interest expense. Credit discount on notes payable, that is 91,110. Alright? So, ganyan siya. Okay, so that's our journal entry. Sige, so difference between 250,000 and 91,110. So, minus natin yan. 250 minus 91,110, that is 158,890. Basically, yun yung amortization natin. Okay, so this is your journal entry, December 31, 2025. Okay, that's for illustrative example number 3. Let's go to illustrative example number 4. Okay, this is about yung pa rin non-interest bearing note, but this time, semi-annual yung payments natin. So, ingat ka lagi class kapag semi-annual. So, ibig sabihin, we have to adjust yung interest rate natin as well as yung term or yung kung gaano katagal yung magiging loan natin. Alright? So, pakita ko na lang or note natin. Okay, prepare the amortization table and journal entries. On January 1, 2025, this is example number 4. ABC company issued a 3-year, 1.2 million non-interest bearing note payable during equal semi-annual. Pag semi-annual, twice a year, every 6 months. Starting July 1, 2025, the prevailing interest rate is 10%. Pag nakita mo yung semi-annual, lagi mong i-adjust agad yung term and yung interest rate na gagamitin mo. Okay? So, lagi mong tatandaan yan. Yung term natin, N or term is equal to 3 years. Pero since semi-annual, meron tayong twice a year, times 2, 6 yung gagamitin natin. Okay? Interest rate natin class is 10%. Pero since semi-annual yan, divide naman. Okay? Huwag mo yung multiply by 2, dapat divide by 2. Divide by 2, therefore 5%. So yung period natin, or N, times 2. Yung interest rate, divide by 2. Tandaan mo yun. So, dito, nagbigay na ng PV factor, okay, at 5% for 6 periods. Pero pag nilagay dyan, PV factor na 10%, huwag mo gagamitin yung 10%. Dapat yung gagamitin mo, PV factor, 5% for 6 periods. Alright? So, tingnan natin class. Let's compute the present value. Basically, present value natin dito is 1.2 million. Tama ba class? Kung 1.2 million, divide by 6. Okay? Ang bayaran natin is 200,000 per year. Okay? 200,000 per year, iyan yung multiply natin by the present value of ordinary annuity na 5.0757. 200,000 times 5.0757, present value is 1,015,140. 1,015,140. Right? Pakita ko yung journal entry. January 1, 2025, debit cash, 1,015,140. Credit notes payable, 1.2 million. Meron tayong discount on notes payable. Difference sila, 1.2 minus 1,015,140. Discount natin is 184,860. And we know, in the balance sheet, yung presentation doon, meron tayong notes payable na 1.2 million, less discount on notes payable, carrying amount natin is 1,015,140. Since this is a non-interest bearing, alam natin class, yung fair value is discounted value. Pag sabing discount, tingnan mo, yung 1,015, mas mababa siya sa face value na 1.2 million. Ibig sabihin ng discounted value. Therefore, kailangan natin i-amortize yan. Okay? Kailangan, yung discount natin, maging zero siya sa maturity date. Alright? So, pakita ko sa inyo yung partial amortization table natin. We have date, and then we have payment, interest expense, amortization, and the carrying amount. Okay? So, January 1, 2025, July 1, 2025, December 31, 2025, and July 1, 2026. So, partial amortization table na gagawin ko. Okay? Yung payment natin, as computed earlier, 200,000 every 6 months. Okay? And then, yung interest expense natin, class, ingat ka dyan. Okay? Huwag mong gagamitin yung 10%. Again, gagamitin mo dyan is the 5%. So, ginagawa ko, sa amortization table, nilagay ko na agad sa taas. Okay, 5% gagamitin ko para hindi na ako nalilito. Okay? Carrying amount natin at the start is 1,015,140. Multiply mo by 5%, you will get 50,757. Amortization is 200,000 minus 50,757, 149,243. Carrying amount natin is 865,897. I'll do the same thing for the next 2 periods. Interest expense natin, 43,295. Amortization is just a difference, 156,705. Carrying amount is 709,192. Okay? And next period natin is 35,460. Amortization is 164,540. And carrying amount is 544,652. So class, sinulat ko lang yung table. Hindi ko na siya pinakita yung computation sa inyo, pero alam ko, kayang-kaya nyo yung amortization table. Now, partial lang yan. Pero natin, sa maturity date, okay, sa last year, magiging zero na yung carrying amount natin. Ibig sabihin, zero na rin yung discount on notes payable natin. Let's do the journal entry, December 31, 2025. Tingin ka lang, July 1, 2025 pala. July 1, 2025, tingin natin class yung journal entry. Tingin ka lang dun sa amortization table natin. Debit notes payable, credit cash, 200,000. Alright? And then debit interest expense. Credit discount on notes payable, 50,757. Complete natin yung difference ng 200,000 and 70 or 50,757. 200,000 minus 50,757, you will get 149,243, which is basically our amortization. Okay? December 31 naman class, debit notes payable, credit cash, alright? And then debit interest expense, credit discount 43,295 yun lang. Pag journal entry, titingin ka lang lagi sa amortization table, alright? So ang key dito sa illustrative example number 4, pag semi-annual, multiply mo agad yung period. So wag 3 yung gagamitin mo yung 6. Pag interest naman, divide, wag multiply. Divide naman, 10% divided by 2, gagamitin mo is 5%. Kapag maraming given na PV factors sa problem, ang gagamitin mo is the PV factor at 15% for 6 periods. Okay? So wag kang papalito doon. So yeah, so let's move on to our next illustrative example. This one is about loans payable. Okay? Kung maalala nyo class, ang difference lang naman ng notes payable and loans payable, yung counterparty mo is a bank. For example, si XYZ is a bank. Okay? Ang entry niya, instead of notes receivable, loans receivable. Instead of notes payable, loans payable. Everything else will be the same. Okay? Ang another significant difference then between notes payable and loans payable is the transaction cost. Because for notes payable, again, usually zero yung transaction cost yan. Kapag loans payable, meron tayong transaction cost. If you remember, ang tawag natin doon, origination fees or origination costs. Alright? So, pag notes payable, zero transaction cost. Pag loans payable, meron tayong transaction cost. Yun lang yung difference nila. Kailan ka ulit may loans payable? Kapag ang counterparty mo or yung katransact mo is a bangko. Alright? So, ganun siya. So, yeah. So, let's answer illustrative example number 5. Okay? So, let's move on to illustrative example number 5. This is about loans payable. So, tingnan natin class kung ano yung important for loans payable. Okay. Prepare the amortization table and journal entries on January 1, 2025. XYZ borrowed 1 million from a bank. Okay, the bank charged a 3% loan origination fee. The principal is due on January 1, 2026, so that's 1 year lang. But 10% is due annually starting January 1, 2020. Or sorry, that is 2028 pala. Principal is due on January 1, 2026. And then every, buli natin yung given. On January 1, 2025, XYZ company borrowed 1 million from a bank. The bank charged a 3%, compute natin 3%. 1 million times 3%. Na-compute nyo yung 30,000? Yes. The principal is due on January 1, 2028. Okay? But 10% is due annually starting January 1, 2026. Prepare the table and journal entry. So, ganito gagawin ko dyan, class. If gagawa tayo ng timeline, okay? January 1, 2025, January 1, 2026, January 1, 2027, and January 1, 2028. Okay? So now, principal dito, class, is 1 million. Tama? Pero meron tayong origination fee for 30,000. Na-compute natin earlier. Therefore, yung proceeds lang natin talaga is 970,000. Tama? So yung cash na ma-receive natin is 970 kasi mag-charge sa atin si bank, origination fee or origination cost of 30,000. So ang mangyari dyan, class, ma-receive natin is 970,000. Tama? So plus yan kasi ma-receive natin yan. So how much yung interest per year? 1 million times 10%, 100,000. So magbabayad tayo ng 100,000 per year. And then, at maturity, syempre, babayaran natin yung principal ng 1 million. Okay? Now, take note, class, na nakalagay dyan, the new effective interest rate is 11.24%. If you can see, from 10%, tumaas yung effective rate natin to 11.24%. Ganyan, class, yung effect kapag merong origination cost. Alright? So, iyan lang yung difference ng loans payable sa notes payable. Since may origination cost, ang effect niyan, lagi mo tatandaan, is increase in effective interest rate. Originally, 10% yan. Pwede mo isipin ganito. Kapag walang origination fee, 10% lang ang rate natin based on 1 million. Okay? Pero since mas maliit yung na-receive natin, ang interest rate na natin is effectively 11.24%. Nakuha niyo ba yun? So pag nag-present value ka, class, para lang ma-visualize nyo, pag present value mo yung 100,000 per year and 1 million na principal at 11.24%, ang makukuha mo dyan is 970,000. So ulitin ko lang. Okay? Kapag may origination cost such as mga loans payable, loans receivable, ang effect niyan is increase in effective interest rate because since mas maliit yung na-receive natin, dapat 1 million pero 970 lang na-receive natin. Effectively, mas malaki yung interest na binabayaran natin. Okay? Kasi, isang sip, parang binabayaran mo rin yung 30,000 yan. Got it? Okay. Now, kung gagawa tayo ng amortization table, so meron tayong date, interest paid, okay, kasi interest bearing yan. Okay? Interest expense, amortization, and carrying amount. Okay? So, lagay ko yung dates dito, January 1, 2025, December 31, 2025, December 31, 2026, and December 31, 2027. Alright? So, yeah. Now, interest paid natin, alam natin, class, is 100,000 per year. So, lagay ko siya dyan. And then, carrying amount natin at the start, 970,000. And take note na ang gagamitin mo na for the interest expense is 11.24%. Okay? So, i-compute ko yung table. I know, kaya nyo i-compute yung amortization table. So, 970 times 11.24%, that's 109,028. Amortization is just the difference between the two, 9,028. Carrying amount, 979,028. Let's go to the second year. Interest expense natin, 110,043. Amortization is 10,043. Carrying amount is 989,071. Okay? Now, sa end of the life or sa maturity, kailangan equal na yung carrying amount 1 million. Alright? So, ibig sabihin, amortization natin should be 10,929. Therefore, interest expense natin is 110,929. Okay? This is the amortization table for the loans payable. Now, sabi dyan, i-journalize din natin, class. No? So, let's go to January 1, 2025. Debit cash. How much yung cash na na-receive natin? It's just 970,000. Credit loans payable. Kasi si bank yung counterparty natin. So, mas appropriate is loans payable. 1 million. We have debit discount, 30,000. Alright? So, yun yung journal entry natin. Next is, let's journalize yung 12/31, 2025. Tingin ka lang dito sa table natin. Meron tayong interest paid na 100,000. Debit interest expense. Credit, actually interest payable, no? Because January 1 pa talaga yung bayaran. So instead of cash, interest payable. Debit interest expense, credit interest payable, that is 100,000. And let's record the amortization na 9,028. Debit interest expense, credit discount on loans payable, 9,028. Okay, so these are your journal entries, the amortization table, and ayan, that's for illustrative example number 5. Okay, and then last concept for notes payable is this one. Fair value option. Sir, parang familiar yung fair value option. Naalala nyo bukas yung discussion natin sa investments? Okay? Kung maalala nyo, meron doon na fair value option wherein if the investment qualifies for amortized cost or FVOCI, pwede pa rin natin siyang i-categorize as FVPL. Alam niyo yan? Ang effect niyan is irrevocable. Once i-designate natin as FVPL, irrevocable yan. Hindi mo naman mababawi yan. Kung may ganung concept sa investments, okay? May ganung concept din sa notes payable or sa financial liabilities. Alright? So applicable din yan. So later papakita ko sa illustrative example, but fair value option also applies to liabilities. Okay, now sir, ano yung effects kapag may fair value option? Well, alam natin class, irrevocable yan. Okay, wala nang bawian. Once i-designate mo yan at fair value, irrevocable na yan. Now, these are the effects. Transaction costs are charged to expense. So, expensed outright yung transaction cost. Right? What else? Since measured siya at fair value, tanda mo class, no amortization. Hindi tayo gagamit ng amortization table. And, magma-mark to market tayo, changes in fair value will be charged to profit and loss. Okay, so isipin mo lang, fair value option, para ka lang nag-accounting for FVPL na natutunan natin sa investments. Okay, so para mas malinaw, let's answer illustrative example number 6. Illustrative example number 6, this is about fair value option. So papakita ko sa inyo class kung ano yung effects. But madali lang yan, no? So let's answer illustrative example number 6. Alright. Okay, prepare the journal entries on January 1, 2025. BSA company borrowed 500,000 8% note due in 4 years. The present value of the note on the date of issuance was 367,500. The entity elected irrevocably the fair value option in measuring the note payable. On December 31, the fair value of the note is 408,150. Siyempre dapat explicit sa problem na inelect ng entity yung fair value option. Otherwise, kung ano lang yung ginawa natin sa previous illustrative examples, yun yung i-follow natin. Right? Now, ulitin ko, ano yung effect class kapag fair value option, lahat ng transaction cost expense natin yan. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, wala tayong premium, wala tayong discount kasi walang amortization. Okay? And mag-mark to market tayo, lahat ng changes in fair value, charge natin sa P&L para ka lang nag-accounting for FVPL. So, illustrative example number 6, ganito technique dyan class. Mag-TT account ka lang dyan. Okay? So, notes payable, tama ba initially, 500,000 yan. Tama? Yung face value. Pero, sabi dyan, yung fair value or present value is 367,500. Tama? So, kailangan ibaba natin yung notes payable. So, for X, X is 500,000 minus 367,500, you should get 132,500. Okay? Now, ang tanong sa inyo class, ano yung 132,500 yan? Is it a gain or loss? Isipin nyo mabuti. From 500,000 naging 367,500. Is it a gain or loss? Answer is, that's a gain. Okay? Sir, bakit siya gain? Kasi, tandaan mo, liability side tayo. Pag bumaba yung payable mo, mas konti yung babayaran mo. Therefore, that's a gain. Opposite siya ng investments. Investment kasi, pag bumaba, loss. Okay? Sa liability side, pag bumaba, gain naman yan. Okay? Now, last sentence on December 31, the fair value of the note is 408,150. So increase natin, 408,150. Solve for X. X is 367,500. Okay. And then minus natin yung 408,150. That is 40,650. 40,650. From 367,500, naging 408,150. Is it a gain or loss? Answer is loss naman this time kasi tumaas yung liability natin. Okay. So ganyan lang ang technique. Sir, bakit di ka gumamit ng amortization table? Because kapag fair value option, wala kang amortization. Okay. Now, kapag meron dito nakalagay na transaction cost, wala naman sa problem. Pero if meron, si-charge mo yun sa expense. Okay? Debit expense, credit cash kapag meron. Let's do journal entries. January 1, 2025, okay? 500,000 yung face value, pero yung present value niya or fair value is 367,500. Debit cash, okay? 500,000. Credit notes payable, 367,500. Credit gain, okay, may gain tayo. From change in fair value, gain from change in fair value, okay, parang FVPL, 132,500. This is our journal entry, January 1, 2025. Debit cash, 500,000, yun yung na-receive natin. Credit notes payable, 367,500. Balancing figure natin is gain, 132,500. Let's go to December 31, 2025. Debit interest expense, credit cash. Huwag mo kalimutan yung magbabayad tayo ng interest. Walang amortization, pero syempre magbabayad pa rin tayo ng interest. Nakalagay dyan, 500,000, and then 8% times 8%, you should get 40,000. Okay? Yung interest paid lang yung meron tayo, pero wala tayong amortization. Debit interest expense, credit cash, 40,000. Debit loss from change in fair value, credit notes payable, 40,650. So as you notice, ang ginawa ko, nag-T-account muna ako, and then nadalian ako sa journal entries. Don't forget na mag-record ng interest expense, which is equal yung sa binayaran natin, okay? Pero wala tayong amortization. So if the question is, how much is the interest expense? Sagot mo dyan, 40,000, which is basically yung 500,000 times yung coupon rate na 8%. Pag tanong sa'yo, how much is the balance? Tingin ka lang dun sa ending balance natin, 408,150. Okay? So that's how you do fair value option for notes payable. Let's now go to main problem number 1. Main problem number 1 is about refinancing, which na-discuss natin last time under current liabilities. Let's take a look at the question. In its December 31 balance sheet, it should classify note payable as, let's read the given. Marian Inc. has 2 million of note payable due June 15, 2022. So that is currently maturing. Okay, so lagyan natin yan. Main problem number 1, meron tayong note payable, 2 million, which is currently maturing. On December 31, it signed an agreement to borrow up to 2 million to refinance the note payable on a long-term basis. So may nangyaring refinancing. The financing agreement called for borrowings not to exceed 80% of the value of the collateral. So underline mo yung 80%. Ibig sabihin class, ang pwede lang nating i-refinance is 80% of the value of the collateral, or collateral meaning security. Okay? At the date of issue of the December 31 FS, the value of the collateral was 2.4 million. So 2.4 million, multiply natin by 80%. Okay? 2.4 million times 80%, you get 1,920,000. So iyan lang daw class yung pwede nating i-refinance out of 2 million. Okay? Now, under the existing loan facility, it has the discretion to refinance or roll over the note payable for at least 12 months after the balance sheet date. Kung maalala niyo yung concepts ng refinancing, kapag meron tayong discretion to refinance, kahit nangyari yung refinancing before December 31 or after December 31, considered yung note natin or notes payable as non-current. Okay? Pero dito class, ang nangyari dyan, so nirefinance natin, pero ang maximum daw na pwede natin i-refinance is 1,920,000. So ang gagawin ko dyan, out of 2 million, yung 1,920,000 na meron tayong discretion to refinance, non-current liability yan. Okay? Difference nila, 2 million minus 1,920, 80,000, hindi natin yan ma-refinance, therefore consider din as current liability. Answer natin for main problem number 1 is letter C, 80,000 short-term or current liability, 1,920,000 long-term or non-current liability. Okay? That's for main problem number 1. Let's proceed to the second part of our discussion. This is about debt restructuring. Okay? Let's have an illustration. For example, we are ABC. And then nag-loan tayo from Metrobank, 1 million pesos na loan. In exchange, magbabayad tayo ng principal and interest. Right? Ang tawag natin kay ABC, tayo si borrower. Ang tawag natin kay Metrobank, siya si lender or creditor. Right? Now, let's say after a few years, naka-experience tayo ng financial problems. Hindi tayo makabayad ng principal and interest kay Metrobank. Okay? Now, si Metrobank pwede siyang mag-provide sa atin ng concession or other ways to settle our obligation. Okay? Ang tawag natin dyan class is debt restructuring. And we have 3 types of debt restructuring. Asset swap, equity swap, and modification of terms. Iisa-isahin natin yan. Let's start with asset swap. Pag sinabi mong asset swap, ang ipambabayad natin sa obligation natin na 1 million pesos is a non-cash asset. Examples of non-cash assets, accounts receivable, inventory, investments, and PPE. Okay? So basically, instead of cash ang ipambayad mo, through asset swap, non-cash asset yung ibabayad natin kay Metrobank. Okay? Actually, ang pinaka-common dyan class is PPE, specifically land. Alright? Ang tawag natin dyan is mortgage, or collateral, or security. Okay? So paano nangyari yan, sir? So, utang tayo kay Metrobank na 1 million pesos, pero naka-collateral yung land natin. Right? So, ibig sabihin ng class, magkamukha lang ibig sabihin ng mortgage, collateral, and security. Magkamukha lang yan. So, ang mangyayari doon, pag hindi tayo nakabayad kay Metrobank, i-foreclose niya yung land. Pag na-foreclose niya yung land, bayad na tayo. Ang tawag natin doon, asset swap, or in your oblicon, sa RFB din yun, tawag ng class, dation in pago, okay? Or dation in payment, if you're familiar. Right? Now, tandaan mo lang class, sa accounting for asset swap, we just compare the carrying value of the liability versus the carrying value of the asset. Yun lang siya. Carrying value versus the carrying value. I-ignore mo yung fair market value. Alright? So, apply natin yung class. Let's go to illustrative example number 7. Okay? Let's go to illustrative example number 7. Pakita ko sa inyo class kung paano yung asset swap. Okay? Sige. Illustrative example number 7. Requirements, compute the gain or loss on extinguishment and prepare the journal entry. To record the dation and pago. Again, asset swap. Okay? Dation and pago din yan. CBA company is in financial trouble and could not meet maturing installments and interest on its bank loan of 5 million. The accrued interest is 1 million. Okay, so basically, hindi natin mabayaran yung principal na 5 million and interest na 1 million. The entity and the bank agreed on a dation and pago arrangement, which is an asset swap. Thus, the mortgage land, pag sinabi mortgage, secured yung loan ng land natin. Pwedeng i-foreclose si bank yun. Okay? We're given by the entity as full payment for the loan, including accrued interest. The cost of the land is 1.5 million. Building 6 million, accumulated depreciation is 1.8 million. The fair value of the land and building is about 5.9 million. Sabi ko kanina, carrying value yung mahalaga sa atin. Ibig sabihin, yung fair value na 5.9 million, i-disregard mo yan. Huwag mong gagamitin yan. Okay? So, ganito lang gagawin ko class sa example number 7. Compute the gain or loss. Well, actually, yung journal entry ko na lang para mas mabilis. Okay? Debit mortgage payable, how much? Principal, 5 million. Debit interest payable, ito yung accrued interest, which is 1 million. Credit land, sabi ni sir, carrying value daw, so yung cost na 1.5 million. Credit building, 6 million. Don't forget to debit the accumulated depreciation. How much yan? 1.8 million. I-disregard mo yung fair market value ng 5.9 million. Pang trick lang yan, okay? So, yung balancing figure natin is gain or loss. Doon muna tayo sa debit. Debit 5 million plus 1 million plus 1.8 million. So, debit natin is 7.8 million. Yung credit natin, minus 1.5 minus 6 million. Nakuha ko dito is 300,000. So, meron tayong credit gain on extinguishment. Okay? Gain on extinguishment of loan, 300,000. So, sagot natin yung class. Compute for the gain or loss. Gain tayo ng 300,000. Journal entry. Yan yung journal entry natin. Okay, asset swap. Very straightforward. Carrying amount of the loan or the liability, including the accrued interest, kasama yung accrued interest. Compare natin sa carrying amount of the non-cash asset. That is the gain or loss. Alright? Sige, let's go to main problem number 2. Main problem number 2 is still about asset swap. Tingnan natin class. Okay, how much is the gain on extinguishment? Ronaldo Company shows the following balances. December 31, meron tayong note payable na 1 million and may accrued interest or interest payable na 200,000. The company is in financial distress and negotiates with the creditor for the settlement of the note payable. Consequently, the company transfers its investment in trading securities, which is a non-cash asset. Okay, investment. In full satisfaction of the note, the trading securities are carried at 600 and have a fair value of 1.1 million. Ano gagamitin natin? 600 or 1.1 million? 600,000. Again, carrying value versus carrying value. Pang dito lang yung fair value na yan. So, ang gagawin ko dyan, journal entry na para mas madali ma-visualize. Debit notes payable, 1 million for the principal. Debit interest payable, that is 200,000. Credit trading securities or basically yung FBPL natin, 600,000. Okay, so may 1.2 million tayo na debit, 600,000 credit. Therefore, meron tayong credit gain on extinguishment, 600,000. Sagot natin sa main problem number 2, letter D, 600,000. Easy. Okay, so journal entry lang. Liability at carrying amount. Okay, asset at carrying amount. Difference between the two is gain or loss. That's how you do asset swap. Let's now go to the second type of debt restructuring, which is equity swap. Okay, from the word itself, equity. So, ang gagawin natin class, mag-i-issue tayo ng shares, issuance of shares in settlement of our obligation. Now, yung sa asset swap, asset yung pinababayad natin. Sa equity swap, obviously, shares or equity yung pinababayad natin. Now, this time, since si Metrobank, pag naka-receive siya ng shares sa atin, basically, si creditor, which is the bank, magiging shareholder siya. Tama? So, ganun nangyari sa equity swap. Okay? Since mag-i-issue tayo ng shares, magiging shareholder si Metrobank. Alright? Now, anong tatandaan natin, sir, dyan? Sa accounting for equity swap. Tandaan mo, class, may hierarchy yan. Okay? kung ano yung measurement natin. Number one is the fair value of the shares or fair value of equity. Second is fair value of liability. And third, which is hindi naman usually ginagamit pero lagyan natin, carrying value of liability. Tatandaan mo lang yung hierarchy na yan. Okay? First is fair value of the shares na inisyu natin. If hindi given, fair value of liability. If hindi pa rin given, carrying value of liability. Okay? So let's apply that by answering illustrative example number 8. Okay? So dali lang yan. Illustrative example number 8 about equity swap. Okay. So yeah, provided journal entries for the two scenarios above. On January 1, 2025, the F company settled a 1 million loan payable by issuing to the lender 10,000 shares, par value of 50. Meron tayong two scenarios, okay, for illustrative example number 8. Scenario number 1, the shares are selling at 120 per share. 120, that is a fair value on January 1. And then scenario number 2 naman, the fair value of the shares is not readily or reliably determinable, okay? So basically, sinasabi dyan, yung scenario 1 daw natin, given yung fair value of the shares or determinable yung fair value of the shares. Scenario number 2, hindi daw determinable, therefore, ang gagamitin natin is fair value of liability. Let's go to scenario number 1 muna. Ito lang gagawin ko dyan, class. Pakita ko sa inyo journal entry. Meron tayong debit loans payable or notes payable, 1 million. Wala namang accrued interest, so wala tayong debit interest payable. Credit share capital, which is at par value, okay? Lagi at par value yung share capital. 10,000 times 50, that is 500,000. Credit share capital, 500,000. Take note, sabi ko dyan, fair value of shares. How much yung fair value of shares? 120. Tama ba? Tama ba, class, yung par value is 50? Therefore, yung share premium natin is 70 kasi 120 yung fair value. Okay, 50 plus 70, that is 120. So, ang gagawin ko dyan, ilang shares? 10,000 shares times 70. Okay, meron tayong credit share premium, 700,000. So, equity, next time natin i-discuss yan. Okay, tandaan mo lang yung share capital at par value lagi iyan. And then share premium is excess of par. So basically, yung sum nila na 1.2 million, iyan yung fair value of shares. Okay? Meron tayong debit na 1 million, meron tayong credit na 1.2 million, meron balancing figure, loss on extinguishment, 200,000. Okay, that's our journal entry for scenario number 1. Let's go scenario number 2. Scenario number 2, what if daw, yung fair value of the shares is not readily determinable? Doon tayo sa fair value of liability. Journal entry natin, debit loans payable, 1 million. Okay? Credit share capital still at par value. Pero basahin natin scenario 2. The fair value of the shares is not reliably determinable. The loan pays annual interest of 12%. So 1 million times 12% interest is 120,000 per year. At each year, sa remaining term of 3 years. Binigyan yung PB factor sa atin. The prevailing market rate, 8%. PB factor of 1 at 8%. Yun yung para sa principal, 0.7938. PV annuity factor, yun yung para sa interest, 2.5771. So, gagamitin natin class is fair value of liability. Ganito gagawin dyan. I'll compute the present value. Doon muna ako sa principal. Okay, principal natin is 1 million. Tama? So 1 million multiply sa PB factor na 0.7938. 1 million times 0.7938. That is 793,800. Let's compute the PV of the interest. How much ulit yung interest? 12% daw. So 1 million times 12%, 120,000. Multiply natin sa PV, ordinary annuity na 2.5771. 120,000 times 2.5771, you get 309,252. Add natin yung class, 793,800 plus 309,252, 1103052. Okay? So ang gagawin ko dyan, ito daw class yung fair value of the liability. Alright? So, share premium ko is just a difference between this and yung par value. Alright? So, 1103052 minus 500,000, yung share premium natin class is 603,052. Ako yan. Alright? So, sa scenario 1, meron tayong fair value of the shares. Kaya 1.2 million yan. Sa scenario number 2, wala tayong fair value of the shares. Kaya dapat, yung sum nito is equal to the fair value of the liability. 1103052. Gets? Okay. Balancing figure natin. Yung credit natin, 500,000 plus 603,052 minus mo sa 1 million. Therefore, meron tayong loss na 103,052. Debit loss on extinguishment, 103,052. That's how you answer the illustrative example number 8. Okay. Let's go to main problem number 3. Still about equity swap. Equity swap. Main problem number 3. Okay. Question is, how much is the gain on equity swap? Right? So, tignan natin kung may given fair value of the shares, yung gagawin natin pag wala fair value of liability. On December 31, Ariana Company shows the following data. Meron tayong mortgage payable 4 million, meron tayong interest payable na 300,000. So, ganito gagawin ko dyan, class. Journal entry, debit mortgage payable 4 million, debit interest payable 300,000. The company is threatened with a court suit if it could not pay its maturing debt. Accordingly, the company enters into an agreement with the creditor for the issuance of common stock. So, it's equity swap. The agreement provides for the issuance of 35,000 shares with par value of 100. Common stock is currently quoted at 130. So, given yung fair value of shares. Gagawin ko dyan, credit share capital, which is at par value. Okay, so 35,000 times 100, that's 3.5 million. Okay, and then share premium natin, well, dapat, yung par natin is 100, yung fair value natin is 130, therefore, 30 pesos yung share premium natin. Okay, ilang shares? 35,000. 35,000 times 30, share premium natin is 1,050,000. Balancing figure, okay, debit natin is 4 million plus 300,000, 4.3 million. Minus natin yung credit, 3.5 million, minus 1,050,000. Therefore, okay, so 4.3 million, minus 3.5, minus 1,050,000. Balancing figure natin, loss on extinguishment of debt. That is 250,000. Main problem number 3, final answer natin class is boy, 250,000. Actually, they say loss. Okay, tama ba? Loss or gain. So, tingnan natin class. So, 4 million, okay, plus 300,000. So, 4.3 million yung debit natin. Okay, and then yung credit natin, that is 3.5 plus 1,050,000. Okay, that's 4,550. So, sagot natin class, lagay mo dyan, loss dapat, hindi gain ha. Debit loss, 250,000. Alright? Sige, so, Ayan. So we're done with asset swap, equity swap. Let's now go to modification of terms. So when you say modification of terms, basically class, nire-restructure natin yung terms of the loan. Ano ba yung terms of the loan? Pag sinabing terms, yan yung interest rate, yan yung maturity, yan yung principal, and so on and so forth. Okay? So examples of modification of terms. First is forgiveness of accrued interest. Okay? So pwedeng sabihin ni Metrobank, meron tayong interest payable kay Metrobank pero hindi natin mabayaran. O sabi ni Metrobank, sige, wag mo nang bayaran yung interest payable na yan. Ang tawag natin doon, forgiveness of accrued interest. What else? Ano pa example ng modification of terms? Well, pwedeng decrease in interest rate. Okay? So for example, class, yung coupon rate natin kay Metrobank, every year nagbabayad tayo ng 10%. Sabi ni Metrobank, sige, wag na 10% bayaran mo, 8% na lang. Ayun, so that's a reduction in interest rate. What else? Reduction in principal. So, 1 million yung principal natin, sabi ni Metrobank, sige, restructure natin yan. Wag na 1 million bayaran mo, 800,000 na lang. Alright? So what else? Pwede rin extension of maturity. So for example, yung maturity date natin is 3 years. Sabi ni Metrobank, sige, extend natin ng 5 years para mas may time ka na magbayad ng principal and interest. These are examples of modification of terms. Now, paano naman sir yung accounting side ng modification of terms? Now, ganito gagawin mo class sa modification terms. Iko-compare natin yung carrying value of our old liability, alright? So versus the present value of the new liability, iko-compare natin yung dalawa na yan, okay? Now, tandaan mo class na ang ipang di-discount mo sa new liability kasi present value yan, so mag-di-discount tayo. Tandaan mo class ha, we will use the old effective rate. Old effective rate. Okay, so double underline ko, old, kasi maraming kakamali dyan. Ang ginagamit nila is the new. Hindi. Kapag mag-compare ka, ulitin ko, pag sinabi yung modification of terms, yung accounting side niyan, carrying value of old, which is basically yung principal and accrued interest, i-compare mo sa present value of the new liability. Okay? Ang ipang di-discount mo dyan is the old effective rate. Huwag new ha, old lagi dyan. O box ko para di mo makalimutan. Ayan, old. Now, dalawa lang possible scenarios dyan, class. Pwedeng yung modification of terms natin will lead to with substantial modification. Okay? And yung isa naman, without substantial modification. Sir, ano ibig sabihin ng with substantial modification and without substantial modification? And bakit sir important yan? Doon tayo sa with. Pag sabing with substantial, yung gain or loss na makakompute natin, kasi compare mo yung dalawa na yan eh. So may gain or loss ka. Yung gain or loss na makakompute mo, if it's at least 10% of the carrying amount of old liability, okay? 10% nito, yung gain or loss. So later, i-apply natin yan, don't worry. Pero tandaan mo lang, kapag yung na-compute natin na gain or loss is at least 10% of the carrying amount of the old liability, ang tawag natin doon, with substantial modification. Okay? And kapag naman yung gain or loss natin is below 10% of the carrying amount of old liability, ang tawag natin din class, without substantial modification. Sir, bakit kailangan pa natin alamin yan? Ganito yung class. Kapag with substantial modification, magre-recognize tayo ng gain or loss. Okay? Pag without substantial modification, hindi tayo magre-recognize ng gain or loss. Yun yung implication niya. Ulitin ko class, modification of terms, compare mo yung carrying value and the present value. Pag with substantial modification, na-compute natin na gain or loss is 10% of our old liability, recognize ka ng gain or loss. Kapag without substantial modification, below 10%, huwag ka mag-recognize ng gain or loss. Okay, so yun lang kasimple. Let's go to illustrative example number 9. Illustrative example number 9. So, pakita ko sa inyo kasing paano yan. Okay, so, sige, illustrative example number 9, provide the journal entries. Alright, on December 31, 2025, Pinnacle Company's loan was modified as follows. The principal was reduced from 5 million to 4 million. Lender forgave the accrued interest, 600,000. Huwag na daw natin bayaran yung 600,000. The maturity date was extended from December 31, 2026 to December 31, 2028. So may extension of maturity date. Nominal interest rate reduced from 12% to 10%. Interest is due annually at each year end. The original effective rate is 12%. The current interest rate is 11%. Ano yung gagamitin mo? Ayun, binax ko na, old. Okay? So underline mo yung 12%, i-disregard mo yung 11, pang lito lang yan. Okay? Now class, ang technique sa modification of terms, gagawa ka ng timeline. Okay? Gamit ka ng timeline. So ganito gagawin ko dyan. Illustrative example number 9, para mas ma-visualize kayo yung mga nangyari. Gamit ako ng timeline. This is December 31, 2025. Today, right? 2026, 2027, 2028. Kasi sabi dyan sa third bullet, yung maturity daw in-extend ng December 31, 2028. Okay? Now, obviously, magbabayad tayo ng interest and principal. Right? So, how much yung interest natin? Tama ba, class? Yung bagong principal natin is 4 million. Tama? So, lagay natin yan. 4 million. Alam natin sa maturity date natin yan binabayaran. And then, yung bagong nominal interest rate natin, according to the fourth bullet, is 10%. So, 4 million times 10%, that's 400,000. Okay? So, 400,000 every year for the next 3 years. And then, magbabayad tayo ng 4 million the principal. So, sir, samulit na po kayo yung 400,000. That is 4 million, which is the new principal, times 10%, which is the new nominal rate. Okay? So, ganyan siya. Now, kailangan ko yung present value yan. Okay? So, sabi ko kasi kanina, yung carrying value, compare natin sa present value. So, ganito lang gagawin ko dyan, class. So, binigyan tayo ng original effective rate at 12%. So, mag-present value tayo. Kayang-kaya nyo na yung present value using your calculator. So, sabayan nyo na lang ang class. So, present value, principal muna tayo, and then interest. Alright? So, get your calculators. Doon muna tayo sa, okay, 1.12. I-press ko yung 1.12. Divide equals M plus ko 3 times kasi 3 periods yan. 1, 2, 3. Na-compute nyo ba yung PV factor natin na 0.71178 and so on and so forth? Multiply natin yan sa principal na 4 million times 4 million. Okay? So yung principal natin, present value niya is 2847,121. So round up ko na lang class. Okay? Doon naman tayo sa interest. Recall memory natin yung kaninang in M plus natin. So dapat makuha nyo yung 2.4018. Okay? Multiply natin by 400,000. Present value of interest is 960,000. 733. Add natin yung dalawa na yan. 2847,121 plus 960733. Okay? Present value is 3807,854. Okay? This is the present value. Now, compare natin yan sa carrying amount or the carrying value. Tandaan mo ka, sa carrying value, lagi mong isasama yung accrued interest. Okay? How much yung carrying value natin? Well, meron tayong principal na original na 5 million plus accrued interest na 600,000. Therefore, yung carrying value natin class is 5.6 million. Okay? So, compare natin yung dalawa na yan, 3807,854, which is basically ito yung new liability natin. Compare natin yung carrying value of our old na 5.6 million. Difference nila is 1792. Okay? 146. Okay? Tanong ko sa inyo class, ano yung 1792,146? Is it a gain or loss? Well, originally, ang kailangan natin bayaran is 5.6 million. Pero, nung nag-restructure tayo ng terms, bumaba 3.8. So, this is a gain, okay? Kasi may liability tayo. So, bumaba yung liability natin. Now, meron tayong gain. Don't forget na i-test natin yung 10%, okay? Of all liability. So, 179,146, i-divide mo yan by 5.6 million. Okay, 179,146 divided by 5.6 million. Nakuha niyo ba yung 32%? Okay, so ibig sabihin, above 10% siya. Okay, at least 10% siya. Meaning, magre-recognize tayo ng gain. Kapag ang tanong sa'yo, how much the gain? Sagot mo dyan, 1792146. Right? Pakita ko yung journal entry para mas ma-appreciate mo. Debit, December 31, 2025. Debit, loans payable old. 5 million yung principal natin. Debit, interest payable, which is 600,000. Yan yung forgiven, accrued interest natin. Credit, loans payable new. Take note, ang bagong principal natin is 4 million. Yan yung face value. Okay? And yung present value natin is 3807,854. So 4 million minus 3807,854, 192,146. Ano tawag natin dyan? Discount yan. Debit discount on loans payable, 192,146. And then credit gain on extinguishment, 179,2,146. Okay, so this is our journal entry. Okay, for illustrative example number 9. Ayan, so, yan siya. Now, pakita ko sa inyo class kung ano yung journal entry sa books naman ni bank. Okay, nagpautang sa atin. Pakita ko sa inyo, ito si borrower, tama? Ito borrower. Doon tayo sa point of view ni lender para mas ma-appreciate niya yung class. So, ganito gagawin natin dyan. Si lender, meron siyang recoverable amount na 3807,854. Okay, meron siyang carrying amount or carrying value na 5.6 million. Uy, familiar yan, sir, ah. Pag carrying amount versus recoverable amount, difference on is impairment loss. Okay, so 5.6 million minus 3807,854, yun din siya. Yung 1792146. 1792146, that is an impairment loss. Okay, so yung gain ni borrower, impairment loss yun ni lender. So entry niya, debit impairment loss, 1792146. Credit interest receivable, kasi finorgive niya yung interest receivable na 600,000. Credit allowance for loan impairment, okay, difference sila, 1792146 minus 600,000, 1192146. 1192146. So FYI na lang yan, class. Pinakita ko lang sa inyo kung ano yung recording ni bank. Meron siya impairment loss. Ulitin ko, yung gain ni borrower is an impairment loss kay lender. Alright, so ganun siya. This is for illustrative example number 9. Now, sir, what if naman, yung instead of 32%, below 10%, for example, 9% lang na-compute natin dyan, paano yung magiging entry mo? Hindi ka mag-recognize ng gain kapag without substantial modification. Pag ang tanong sa'yo, how much the gain or loss, tapos 9% lang yung na-compute mo, zero sagot mo doon, walang gain. Sir, saan mo i-charge yan? Pwede mo i-charge yan sa premium on loans payable. Ganun lang siya. Pero usually naman, ang tanong sa'yo dyan, how much is the gain or loss? Pag with substantial modification, sagot mo, 1792146. Pag without substantial modification, sagot mo, 0. Alright? So, this is for illustrative example number 9. Let's go to isa pa, para ma-practice tayo class. Illustrative example number 10. This is still about modification of terms. Okay, so erase ko muna. Sige, so let's go to next example. Prepare the journal entries. Mr. Accounting had an overdue 8% note payable to ABC at 8 million with accrued interest of 840,000. As a result of settlement, on January 1, ABC Bank agreed to follow the following restructuring. Reduce the principal to 7 million, forgave the 640,000 accrued interest, extend maturity date, and then to December 31, 2026, annual interest, 10%, December 31, 2025, and 2026. Bigyan tayo ng PV factor. Multiply na natin later. Again, ang technique sa modification of terms, gawa ka ng timeline. Alright? So, para mas ma-visualize natin. Today is January 1, 2025. December 31, 2025, December 31, 2026. So, bayad tayo ng interest and principal. How much ulit class yung bago natin principal? According to number 1, 7 million lang yan. According to the fourth bullet, or yung number 4, annual interest of 10%. 7 million times 10%, 700,000 per year. Okay? For the interest. So, kailangan natin i-present value yan to January 1, 2025. Okay, so, compute natin yung present value. Dumo tayo sa principal. Tama ba class? Gagawin ko lang dyan, 7 million, multiply natin by, may PV factor dyan, the present value of 1 at 8%, 0.8573. 7 million times 0.8573, 6,001,000. Tama? 6,001,000. And then, 6,001,100 pala. Okay, so, that's for the principal. Compute natin yung present value of interest, 700,000 per year for 2 years. 700,000 times yung ordinary annuity na 1.7833, you get 1,248,310. 1,248,310. Add natin yung dalawa na yan, plus 6,001,100, that is 7,249,410. Okay, so this is the present value. Compare natin yan sa carrying value. Ano din yung carrying value? Punta ka class dun sa first sentence. Meron tayong 8 million na principal. Meron tayong accrued interest na 640. Therefore, 8,640,000. Yung gain natin, bakit siya gain? Kasi originally, ang utang natin is 8,640 because of the restructuring. Bumaba na, 7,249 na lang. Difference sila, 7,249,410 minus 8,640, you get 1,390,410. 590. Okay? Divide natin yan sa old loan na 8640,000 para malaman natin kung merong substantial modification. Divide by 8640,000, that is 16.10 or 0.09%. Okay? So that is more than or at least 10%. Therefore, pag tanong sa'yo how much the gain or loss, sagot mo dyan, 1,390,590. Alright? Now, pakita ko sa inyo class yung journal entry at the date of restructuring, January 1, 2025, debit notes payable, old. Okay, how much? 8 million. Debit interest payable, which is 640,000. Credit notes payable new, how much yung principal natin bago? 7 million. Credit premium on notes payable, well, yung present value natin is 7,249. Yung principal natin is 7 million, therefore difference na 249,410, that is premium on notes payable. Okay? And then meron tayong gain on extinguishment, that is 1,390,590. Ngayon, what if below 10% yung compute natin? So, pag ang tanong sa'yo is gain or loss, pag below 10%, without substantial modification, therefore, zero magiging sagot pa dyan. Okay, so this is how you do illustrative example number 10. Now, we have 2 remaining questions. Punta ka class dun sa main problem number 4. Okay, so tapusin natin yan. 2 questions to go. Multiple choice, mabilis na lang yung class for main problems 4 and 5. Okay. Sige, how much is the gain on extinguishment? On December 31, the Yala company shows the following balances. Meron tayong notes payable, 5 million. Accrued interest, 1 million. Add mo yung dalawa na yan, 5 million plus 1 million, 6 million. Ang tawag natin dyan, that's the carrying value of the old liability. It is granted by the creditor the following concessions. Accrued interest is forgiven. Principal obligation reduced to 4 million. New interest is 10%. New maturity date, December 31, 2025. So, ganito gagawin ko dyan, class. Sabi ko kanina, una mong gagawin kapag merong debt, merong modification of terms, gagawa ka ng timeline. December 31, 2021, 22, 23, 24, and 25. Kasi in-extend daw yung maturity, 25. Interest and principal, para mas ma-visualize natin, bagong principal, according to the second bullet, is 4 million. And then coupon rate natin, or interest rate, is 10%. 4 million times 10%, that's 400,000 per year. Okay? 400,000 per year for 4 years. Okay, so, let's compute the present value. Doon muna tayo sa principal. Principal natin, 4 million, multiply natin by, magdi-discount tayo. Ang tanong ko sa inyo, class, anong rate yung ipandi-discount mo? Dalawa yung binigay sa atin. Kung mapapansin mo dun sa first part of the problem, notes payable due December 31, 14%. And then may binigay sa third bullet, new interest rate, 10%. Ano yung pandi-discount mo? 14% or 10%? 14%. Kasi sabi ko, old effective interest rate. Okay? That's according to PFRS 9. So yung present value natin, tandaan mo, class, you will use 14%. Okay? Huwag kang gagamit ng 10% ha. Yung 10% gagamitin mo lang yan to compute for the interest. Okay, interest payments. Sige, so, gagawin ko dyan, class. Compute natin yung present value, dumo tayo sa principal. Alright, so, get your calculators. 1.14, ilang periods? 1, 2, 3, 4. Divide equals m plus 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, dumo tayo sa principal. Nakuha niyo yung 0.59208 and so on and so forth. Nakuha niyo yan. Multiply natin yan by the principal na 4 million times 4 million. You get 2368. 321. Okay? So, round off na natin. 2368, 321. Compute naman natin yung present value of the interest. Interest natin is 400,000 per year. I-recall memory nyo siya. Nakita nyo yung 2.9137. Yan yung ordinary annuity. Multiply mo with 400,000. You get 1165. Okay? 484 or 485. Round off na natin. 2368, 321 plus 1165, 485. You get 3533,880. This is the present value. Carrying value as computed earlier. 5 million principal plus interest of 1 million, that's 6 million. Difference sila. That is 2466. 194. Okay? So obviously, pag dinivide mo by 6 million yan, definitely more than 10% yan. Okay? So 41%. Okay? So how much daw yung gain or loss? Obviously, gain yan. 2466, 194 or punta doon sa boy. That's the closest kasi nag-round off tayo. No? So 2466, 120. For number 4, answer natin is boy. And that's one main problem number 5. This is still about modification of terms. So tignan natin last. Okay, on December 31, Leilani Company was experiencing financial difficulties and entered into a debt restructuring. The creditor restructured the obligation as follows. Reduce the principal from 4 million or 5 million to 4.5 billion. Forgave the interest, extend maturity date, reduce the interest from 12 to 10%, interest was payable annually. Okay, how much daw yung gain or loss? Again, as usual, gawa tayo ng timeline, 2021, 22, 23, and 24. Okay, so interest and principal. Bago natin principal is 4.5 million. Bago nating interest rate is, according to the last bullet, 10%. Okay, so 4.5 million times 10%. Interest natin is 450,000 per year for the next 3 years. Okay, now let's compute the present value. Start mo tayo with the principal. Class, ano gagamitin mo mong present value? 12% or 10%? Tingin ka doon sa last bullet. 12 or 10? Old gagamitin natin, which is 12%. Okay, compute natin yung PV factor. 1.12 divide, and then 3 yung periods natin. Equals m plus 3 times 1, 2, 3. Na-compute nyo yung 0.71178 and so on and so forth. Multiply natin yan by the principal na 4.5 million. Present value of the principal, 3203,011. 3203,011. Present value of the interest, okay? So, recall memory natin, makuha mo yung 2.4018. Multiply natin by interest of 450,000. You get 1080. Okay, 824. Add natin yung dalawa na yan. 3203,011 plus 1080,824. You get 4283,835. 835. Okay? So this is the present value. Carrying value is basically yung principal na 5 million and then yung accrued interest na 600,000. So 5.6 million. Difference between the two, 5.6 million minus 4283. Okay? 835. You will get 1316. 16, okay. 165, okay? 1316, 165. Alright, so definitely more than 10% yan kasi pag dinivide mo by 5.6 million yan, that is 23.5%, okay? So sagot natin class for number 5 is gain, dapat gain kasi bumaba yung liability natin. 1316, 165, therefore dog sagot mo dyan. None of the above. Sagot natin 1316, 165, gain. Alright, so that's for main problem number 5. Okay, that's it for notes payable and debt restructuring.